You leave the conversation and your hands are shaking. Not violently, not dramatically, but just enough for you to notice that something inside you has been disturbed. Your heart feels slightly heavier than it should. Your thoughts feel foggy. You cannot clearly explain why. Nothing obvious happened. No shouting. No direct insult. No visible act of aggression. On the surface it looked like a completely ordinary interaction between two adults exchanging words in a calm tone. And yet, something inside you feels damaged. They did not yell at you. They did not threaten you. They did not call you names. In fact, if someone asked you to repeat exactly what happened, you might struggle to identify the precise moment where things turned toxic. Everything they said could technically pass as harmless conversation. But somehow you walked away feeling drained. Hollow. As if someone quietly reached inside your chest and removed a small piece of your confidence while you were busy trying to stay polite. So you replay the conversation in your mind again and again. The phrases echo in your head like subtle psychological landmines. I was just joking. You're too sensitive. I'm only saying this because I care about you. Each sentence appears harmless on the surface. Each phrase carries the costume of concern, humor, or honesty. Yet beneath that costume lies something corrosive. Something manipulative. Something that slowly erodes your certainty about yourself. It feels like concern. But it behaves like control. It feels like closeness. But it operates like domination. This is the quiet poison of psychological manipulation. Most people have encountered individuals like this at some point in their lives. The smiling colleague who subtly sabotages your reputation while pretending to support your success. The romantic partner who slowly rewrites reality until you begin questioning your own memory. The relative who fires guilt like a precision weapon, striking exactly where your empathy lives. These individuals do not operate with loud hostility. They operate with calculated ambiguity. Their words rarely sound openly aggressive. Their attacks are disguised as humor, advice, disappointment, or concern. And that is exactly why they are so difficult to confront. Because the moment you react, they immediately flip the narrative and accuse you of overreacting. The result is psychological confusion. You begin doubting your interpretation of events. You begin analyzing every sentence they say. You begin asking yourself whether you are being unfair. But the truth is simpler and far more uncomfortable. You are fighting someone who is not playing the same game as you. You are trying to maintain harmony. They are trying to gain control. You are following the rules of social decency. They are following the rules of psychological warfare. You approach the interaction with empathy, assuming mutual respect. They approach the interaction with strategy, assuming advantage. This creates a catastrophic imbalance. Because empathy is not designed to defeat manipulation. It is designed to build cooperation. And when cooperation is impossible, empathy becomes a vulnerability that can be exploited again and again. Imagine bringing flowers to a battlefield where the other side arrived with weapons. That is what many people unknowingly do in toxic relationships. They attempt to solve power struggles using kindness. They attempt to negotiate with individuals who have no intention of negotiating. They attempt to explain their feelings to people who treat feelings as leverage. And as long as that dynamic continues, the outcome is predictable. You lose energy. You lose clarity. You lose influence. You become the emotional battery that powers someone else's sense of importance. But there is a turning point available. A moment where you stop asking how to make toxic people understand you, and start asking a far more powerful question. What if the goal is not understanding? What if the goal is strategy? What if the goal is not becoming cruel, but becoming untouchable? Because once you understand the true mechanics of power in human interaction, everything changes. Suddenly you realize that manipulation thrives on reaction. It feeds on your attempts to defend yourself. It grows stronger every time you try to prove your innocence. The more emotional energy you invest, the more influence you give away. This realization forces a difficult transformation. You must stop approaching toxic individuals with the mindset of emotional repair and begin approaching them with the mindset of strategic containment. You are no longer trying to change them. You are learning how to neutralize them. And the first step in doing that is recognizing that what you are dealing with is not merely a difficult personality. It is a behavioral pattern. A pattern that confuses control with connection. A pattern that seeks validation through domination. A pattern that interprets emotional reactions as victory. Many individuals trapped in this pattern are driven by an invisible internal void. A persistent fear of insignificance. A deep anxiety that they are not important enough, powerful enough, or respected enough. To escape that internal emptiness, they seek external control. If they can provoke you, they feel powerful. If they can destabilize you, they feel important. If they can manipulate your reactions, they feel significant. Your emotional state becomes the mirror that confirms their existence. And that is precisely why the traditional responses fail. Explaining your pain does not stop them. Showing patience does not soften them. Appealing to fairness does not awaken empathy. Because the game they are playing is not about fairness. It is about leverage. Which means the only real solution is learning how to remove that leverage entirely. The moment you stop reacting in predictable ways, the moment you stop supplying emotional energy, the moment you stop revealing the internal buttons that can be pushed, something remarkable begins to happen. Their influence collapses. Not instantly, but steadily. Because manipulation requires participation. And once you withdraw that participation, the entire dynamic begins to crumble. This transformation does not require cruelty. It requires discipline. The discipline to control your reactions. The discipline to protect your information. The discipline to prioritize long-term sovereignty over short-term emotional satisfaction. And that discipline begins with one powerful shift in perspective. The game is not about being right. The game is about maintaining control of yourself. The moment you lose that control, even for a few seconds, the advantage returns to them. But the moment you master your responses, the battlefield changes entirely. Because the most destabilizing force you can introduce into a manipulative interaction is something they rarely encounter. Strategic silence. Emotional neutrality. Psychological invisibility. When someone attempts to provoke you and receives nothing in return, they experience something profoundly unsettling. A void. And when a manipulator stares into a void long enough, they begin to panic. That is where the real shift begins. Once you understand that manipulation feeds on emotional reaction, a new form of defensive strategy becomes possible. Instead of confronting toxic behavior directly, you begin dismantling the psychological fuel that keeps it alive. Most manipulators rely on reading people. They study your expressions, your tone of voice, your hesitation. They analyze what makes you uncomfortable, what makes you defensive, and what makes you desperate to explain yourself. Every emotional response you reveal becomes a data point that helps them refine their strategy. If they discover that criticism about your work makes you anxious, they will subtly question your competence. If they discover that you fear abandonment, they will periodically withdraw affection. If they learn that you care deeply about fairness, they will accuse you of being selfish whenever you protect your boundaries. They are mapping your psychological landscape. Every visible reaction becomes a landmark on that map. Which means the most effective defensive maneuver is simple in theory but extremely difficult in practice. You must become unmappable. Your emotional terrain must appear flat, calm, and unrevealing. When they attempt to trigger you, they should encounter the psychological equivalent of a blank wall. This approach is sometimes described as the gray rock strategy, but its deeper principle goes far beyond appearing boring. It is about creating strategic ambiguity in every interaction. When someone attempts to provoke you, your instinct may be to correct them immediately. That's not what happened. You misunderstood me. You're being unfair. But every attempt to clarify the situation feeds the conversation they want to create. Instead, imagine responding with calm neutrality. A pause. A quiet glance. And then nothing more. Silence, when used deliberately, becomes a powerful tool. Not passive silence, but intentional silence. The kind that signals emotional self-possession rather than avoidance. When an insult receives no reaction, the aggressor experiences something psychologically destabilizing. Their attack loses gravity. Without emotional resistance, their words simply fall to the ground. Consider a scenario that frequently occurs in professional environments. A colleague makes a remark designed to undermine your credibility in front of others. The comment is phrased as humor, but its intention is unmistakable. Most people instinctively defend themselves. They explain their workload. They justify their schedule. They try to repair the damage immediately. But that defensive response actually amplifies the attack. Because now the entire room is focused on your explanation. A different approach changes the dynamic completely. You pause. You acknowledge the comment with calm neutrality. Perhaps you say something simple such as, "That's an interesting perspective." Then you continue speaking about the topic that actually matters. What just happened in that moment is subtle but powerful. You refused the invitation to engage in a petty conflict. You treated the remark as insignificant. And by doing so, you quietly repositioned the aggressor as the one who disrupted the conversation unnecessarily. The room senses the imbalance. Without you raising your voice or attacking anyone directly, the credibility of the provocateur begins to erode. Indifference often wounds manipulation more deeply than confrontation. Because confrontation confirms that the manipulator succeeded in provoking you. Indifference suggests that their influence never existed. However, this approach requires emotional discipline. In many situations, the manipulator will escalate their behavior when their initial attempts fail. They may become louder, more sarcastic, more aggressive. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as an extinction burst, a temporary surge in negative behavior that occurs when a previously successful tactic suddenly stops producing results. It is similar to a child throwing a louder tantrum when a parent stops rewarding the behavior. The critical mistake many people make is abandoning their strategy at exactly this moment. They assume the escalation means their approach is failing. In reality, it often means the opposite. It means the manipulator's usual methods are no longer working. If you maintain your composure during this phase, something remarkable begins to happen. The toxic individual starts searching for a different target. Because manipulation is rarely about justice. It is about efficiency. Predators prefer easy prey. When provoking you becomes difficult, time-consuming, and emotionally unrewarding, many manipulators gradually redirect their attention elsewhere. Your silence becomes a form of psychological conditioning. You are teaching them that interacting with you no longer produces the reward they seek. But emotional reactions are not the only resource manipulators extract. Information is another powerful currency in psychological power struggles. In healthy relationships, sharing personal experiences builds intimacy and trust. But in manipulative relationships, personal information becomes leverage. Every insecurity you reveal can be weaponized. Every private frustration can be repeated later in distorted form. Every vulnerability becomes a potential pressure point. This does not mean you must become cold or isolated from the world. It simply means you must be selective about who receives access to your internal life. Strategic privacy is not dishonesty. It is psychological self-defense. When individuals ask about your plans, your struggles, or your ambitions, you are not obligated to reveal everything. A polite but vague response often protects you far more effectively than brutal honesty. Statements such as, "I've been busy with a few projects lately," or, "Things are moving along," provide enough information to remain socially polite while revealing nothing that could be manipulated later. This approach may initially feel unnatural. Modern culture often encourages constant sharing and radical transparency. But transparency without discernment can expose your most sensitive vulnerabilities to people who do not respect them. Strategic ambiguity protects your autonomy. The less manipulators know about your fears, your goals, and your weaknesses, the fewer tools they possess to destabilize you. Another powerful conversational technique involves redirecting attention away from yourself entirely. When someone probes for personal information, shift the focus back toward them. Ask questions. Encourage them to speak about their own experiences. Many individuals who enjoy manipulation also enjoy hearing themselves talk. While they reveal their perspectives, you remain calm, observant, and protected. You learn more about their intentions than they learn about yours. And over time, this imbalance of information becomes an invisible advantage. They believe they understand you. But in reality, the map they are drawing contains very few accurate landmarks. Meanwhile, you have quietly observed the patterns of their behavior. Their triggers. Their ambitions. Their weaknesses. And once you understand those patterns, an entirely new level of strategic awareness becomes available. You are no longer reacting blindly. You are observing the game from above. There are moments, however, when silence and distance are not enough. Situations arise where manipulation becomes overt, persistent, or dangerous to your reputation and stability. In those moments, a more direct strategy becomes necessary. The greatest vulnerability of toxic behavior is exposure. Manipulation thrives in ambiguity. It relies on hidden implications, subtle insults, and private conversations that cannot easily be verified. The manipulator counts on social politeness to protect them. Most people hesitate to challenge rude remarks publicly because they fear appearing confrontational. This hesitation creates the perfect camouflage for psychological aggression. But once that camouflage is removed, the entire dynamic changes. One of the most effective ways to dismantle covert insults is through calm clarification. When someone delivers a sarcastic comment disguised as humor, respond with quiet curiosity rather than anger. Ask them to explain exactly what they meant. Do not accuse. Do not shout. Simply request clarification. The moment they are forced to articulate the underlying meaning of their remark, the hidden aggression becomes visible to everyone present. They are placed in a difficult position. Either they admit the insult directly, revealing their hostility, or they retreat awkwardly, claiming they were misunderstood. In both cases, the mask begins to crack. Another powerful strategy involves documenting interactions when dealing with manipulative individuals in professional or legal environments. Verbal conversations are easily distorted. Memories can be reinterpreted. Statements can be denied. Written communication, however, creates an objective record. Summarizing agreements through email or written notes removes the manipulator's ability to rewrite history later. Each documented interaction becomes a protective barrier that prevents gaslighting and misrepresentation. The key principle is consistency. You do not threaten consequences. You simply create transparency. Manipulators often rely on confusion to maintain control. When every instruction, promise, and decision is recorded clearly, the environment becomes far less hospitable to deception. Eventually they recognize that their usual tactics will not function in a system where accountability exists. Another common tactic employed by toxic individuals is the smear campaign. When they realize they can no longer control you directly, they attempt to control how others perceive you. Rumors begin circulating. Your behavior is reinterpreted through a distorted narrative. Many people panic at this stage. They rush to defend themselves, attempting to disprove every accusation individually. But frantic self-defense often reinforces the perception of guilt. A stronger strategy focuses on long-term reputation rather than short-term arguments. Consistency of character becomes your fortress. If colleagues, friends, and community members repeatedly experience you as calm, reliable, and respectful, isolated accusations lose credibility. The contrast between your observable behavior and the manipulator's narrative becomes impossible to ignore. Time exposes patterns. People eventually notice who creates conflict and who resolves it. Who spreads rumors and who avoids gossip. Who escalates tension and who maintains professionalism. When you refuse to participate in the drama, the manipulator is left performing alone on a stage that no longer has an audience. Yet there is one final strategy that surpasses all others in power. Strategic absence. The most decisive way to neutralize toxic influence is often to remove yourself entirely from the environment that sustains it. Not through dramatic confrontations. Not through emotional speeches. But through quiet, decisive withdrawal. This may involve reducing contact with individuals who consistently drain your energy. It may involve setting firm boundaries about when and how communication occurs. In extreme cases, it may involve ending relationships that have repeatedly demonstrated destructive patterns. Such decisions are rarely easy. Human beings are deeply wired for connection, and separating from familiar relationships can feel frightening even when those relationships are unhealthy. But personal sovereignty requires recognizing when a dynamic cannot be repaired. Not every conflict can be resolved. Not every relationship can be healed. Sometimes the most intelligent strategy is to conserve your emotional resources and redirect them toward environments where growth, respect, and mutual support are possible. When you step away from toxic dynamics completely, something remarkable often occurs. Your mental clarity returns. Your energy stabilizes. Your sense of self strengthens. Without the constant pressure of manipulation, you begin rediscovering the parts of your personality that were gradually suppressed. confidence, creativity, curiosity, peace. And perhaps the most surprising realization emerges slowly over time. The individuals who once seemed powerful lose their influence entirely once you stop participating in their games. Their ability to disturb you existed only because you were emotionally present inside the conflict. When you remove yourself from that battlefield, their strategies become irrelevant. They may attempt to provoke you again. They may attempt to regain attention. But eventually, the absence of reaction forces them to seek stimulation elsewhere. Your life continues expanding beyond the boundaries they once tried to impose. And with each passing year, the distance between who you were during those toxic interactions and who you have become afterward grows wider. You are no longer reacting to manipulation. You are designing a life that manipulation cannot easily reach. A life structured around autonomy. A life built on deliberate choices rather than emotional pressure. A life where your empathy is no longer exploited but protected. True strength is not measured by the ability to dominate others. It is measured by the ability to remain grounded, self-directed, and psychologically independent regardless of the behavior surrounding you. Once that independence is established, the games that once felt overwhelming begin to look remarkably small. And the people who relied on those games gradually fade into the background of your story. Not as villains. Not as teachers. But simply as passing figures who once revealed how valuable your inner sovereignty truly is.